The house had been silent for far too long. The kind of silence that wraps around you like an old, heavy blanket, suffocating, familiar, and almost impossible to shake off. Daniel sat on the edge of his couch, his eyes fixed on the door that hadn't opened in 3 years. The air inside was thick with memories, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to the curtains, the photo frame on the table slightly tilted, a picture of her laughing under the autumn sun. He tried moving on, he really had, but every knock on someone else's door, every passing car, every song that played too softly on the radio reminded him of what he lost. He didn't know if he was waiting anymore, or if the waiting had simply become a part of him. If you believe in second chances, forgiveness, and the kind of love that time can't erase, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this one reach more hearts like yours. It had been a long time since Daniel had any visitors. Life had folded into a simple, colorless routine. Work, home, silence, repeat. His world existed in shades of gray now, and though he'd convinced himself that peace had returned, deep down, he knew he had only learned to live with emptiness. Once, love had filled this home. Once, laughter had echoed through these rooms, and 2 people had believed they were unbreakable. But then came the misunderstandings. Small at first, like cracks in a window, a forgotten promise, a missed dinner. Words left unsaid. Then those cracks widened, splintering into anger and silence until one night, she'd walked out. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she couldn't bear the weight of love that kept hurting. Her name was Claire. And though Daniel never spoke her name out loud anymore, it still lived somewhere in his chest, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat he couldn't quite silence. 3 years had gone by since that night. 3 birthdays, 3 Christmases, 3 long winters. That never seemed to end. She had moved to another city, he'd heard, got a new job, started over. And though Daniel told himself he wanted her to be happy, some part of him selfishly hoped she missed him too, that maybe, on some nights, she looked at her door and wished she could knock again. That evening was no different from any other. The sky outside was gray and soft, the kind of light that makes everything feel distant. He had just set his cup of coffee on the table when he heard it. A knock. Just once. Soft. Hesitant. For a heartbeat, he thought he imagined it. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe his mind playing cruel tricks again. But when he turned toward the door, something in his chest shifted. That old familiar ache. That desperate, foolish hope. He stood still for a long moment, afraid to move, afraid that if he opened the door, the illusion would shatter. But when he did, when he finally turned the handle and pulled it open, she was there, Claire. Standing on the porch, her hand still half raised, as if unsure whether she'd actually meant to knock. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw the same storm of emotions he'd carried for years: regret, longing, fear, and something softer beneath it all. She looked older, maybe a little more tired, but still achingly familiar. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Time seemed to fold in on itself, dragging all their shared memories into that single fragile moment. The smell of rain drifted in from outside, and Daniel realized his hands were trembling. Claire finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know if you'd still be here." He wanted to say 1,000 things. "I never left. I couldn't. I waited. Every single day, I waited." But the words caught in his throat, so he only stepped aside and let her in. The house hadn't changed much. She noticed that immediately. The same curtains, the same couch, even the same photo frame still holding their picture, the one she thought he would have taken down long ago. She looked at it, her eyes glistening, then turned to him. "I thought I'd forgotten how this place smelled," she said softly. Daniel smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I thought I'd forgotten what your voice sounded like." There was no anger in his tone, just quiet truth. And somehow, that made it harder for her to breathe. She placed her bag on the table and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I wasn't planning to come. I was just passing through town. I don't even know why I stopped here." He nodded, pretending to believe her, but deep down he knew. Sometimes the heart leads us back to the one place it's never truly left. For a while, they simply existed in the same room, surrounded by the ghosts of what once was. Every object, every silence between them carried memories. She noticed the coffee mug, the one he used to drink from every morning when she made breakfast. She noticed the faint scratch on the table from when they'd tried to assemble furniture together and failed miserably but laughed for hours about it. "I heard about your father," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't reach out." Daniel's gaze fell to the floor. "He asked about you, right before he passed." That hit her harder than she expected. Tears welled in her eyes unbidden. "I should have called," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, "you should have." The honesty stung. But it also broke the last of the walls between them, because in that simple exchange, years of silence cracked open, and the truth finally began to spill out. Claire admitted how lonely she'd been, how she'd thought leaving would fix what was broken inside her, but it only left a different kind of emptiness. She told him about the sleepless nights, the guilt, the way every new place felt temporary, every new person just a shadow compared to what she'd lost. And Daniel, for the first time, allowed himself to speak too. He told her about the nights he sat by the door waiting for a knock that never came, how he tried to move on, tried to date, tried to forget, but everything felt hollow. How he replayed their last argument in his head 1,000 times, wondering what he could have said differently. There were tears and there were long silences between them, but not the kind that pushed them apart. These silences were healing. Heavy, yes, but honest. They sat there, not as strangers, not even as the people they used to be, but as two souls still learning how to forgive, themselves and each other. Outside, the sky began to darken. Rain tapped gently on the window, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Claire looked toward the door, the same door she had walked out of years ago, and then back at him. "I don't expect anything," she said finally. "I just wanted to see you, to know that you were okay." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not sure I've been okay since you left." The truth of it hung between them, raw and undeniable. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. "You know," he said after a pause, "there were nights I thought I heard your car outside. I'd get up, open the door, and there'd be nothing. I told myself I had to stop hoping, but even now, hearing that knock..." He turned to her, his voice breaking slightly. It felt like breathing after years underwater. Tears streamed down her face. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered. "Maybe," he said softly, "but I'm glad you did." Something in his tone, calm, sincere, and deeply wounded, made her heart ache. She realized that the years apart hadn't erased what they had. They'd only taught them how fragile love could be, and how easily pride could destroy it. She moved closer, hesitating only a second before sitting beside him on the couch. The distance between them felt enormous, yet somehow comforting. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. Just being there, breathing the same air again, was enough. They talked for hours, about everything, and nothing, about where she'd been, how he'd been living, how some nights he still dreamed of her laughing in the kitchen. She told him how she'd kept one of his old sweaters all this time because it still smelled like home. When the rain stopped, she stood up slowly, knowing it was time to go. She reached for her bag, but before she could, Daniel spoke again. "Claire," he said, his voice steady this time, "you don't have to leave just because the rain stopped." She froze, looking at him, really looking at him, and saw not the man she left behind, but the man who still carried love in quiet, unspoken ways. "I don't know if we can ever be the same," she said. He nodded. "Maybe we're not supposed to be the same. Maybe we're supposed to be better." For the first time in years, she smiled, a small, trembling smile that carried hope, fragile but real. That night, she stayed, not because everything was fixed, not because the past could be undone, but because some doors deserved to be opened again. Outside, the moonlight fell softly through the curtains, illuminating the photo frame on the table. Two people, laughing, frozen in time. But perhaps not for much longer. Because somewhere deep inside, love had started breathing again. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, and let others feel the warmth of second chances. Before you go, comment below. Would you open the door again if someone from your past knocked after years of silence?